Darth Plagueis created Anakin Skywalker, but not the way he planned. The popular version of the story says a Sith Lord ran an experiment that accidentally created the Chosen One. Plagueis created the crisis that forced the Force to answer, and Anakin was that answer. Most Sith Lords wanted power. Plagueis wanted something else entirely. In the Legends novel Darth Plagueis, the Moon Sith Lord begins his obsession on the same day he becomes a master. On the mining world of Valdemnik, he kills his own master, a Bith named Darth Tenebris, and then does something no ordinary Sith would think to do. He kneels beside the body and watches. Not the death itself, but what happens inside Tenebris as he dies. Through the Force, Plagueis perceives the Bith's midi-chlorians winking out one by one, like lights losing their power source. They fade, resist, and finally surrender to something larger than either Sith Lord. The Force reclaims what belonged to it. From that moment, Plagueis decides he will learn how to stop it. Over the next several decades, the Moon devoted himself to studying midi-chlorians with a focus no Sith had ever brought to the subject. The Jedi treated midi-chlorians as partners, symbols of a being's connection to the Force. Plagueis treated them as machinery, biological tools he could order and pressure until they obeyed. On the crew of a freighter called a Woebegone, he tested his ability to use the Force to heal wounds and repair damaged organs, calling on midi-chlorians to keep dying beings alive. The results were temporary. The midi-chlorians cooperated briefly, then stopped, as if they recognized the interference and chose not to sustain it. But Plagueis kept pushing. On the Hunter's Moon of Sojourn, he spent years experimenting on captive subjects. A meeting with a Force-resistant Yanchori delegation reveals something that changed his understanding entirely. Their midi-chlorians had evolved a natural defense against outside influence. That discovery fascinated him. If midi-chlorians could protect a being from the Force, then they were not just passive translators. They had broken something close to a will of their own. If they had a will, Plagueis believed, that will could be broken. His precision grew. He learned to override a being's natural Force defenses on command, and even managed to increase his own midi-chlorian count, something previously thought impossible. Every Sith Lord before him had used the dark side as a weapon. Plagueis was trying to turn the source of life itself into a tool. Plagueis was not simply trying to become more powerful. He was trying to prove that the Sith could command the Force the same way they commanded the Senate, the Republic, and the Jedi Order. He was convinced that the divide between organic life and the Force could be bridged, and that death could be erased from existence. The Sith were on the verge of a transformative leap, one that would let an enlightened elite overthrow the Force's natural order entirely. He was not alone in this. His apprentice, a young Naboo politician named Palpatine, trained under the Sith name Darth Sidious, shared his ambition. Together, at some point roughly a decade before the events of the Phantom Menace, they attempted something unprecedented. They challenged the Force directly. Months of intense meditation followed, during which the two Sith waged an etheric war, a contest of pure Force will projected beyond their physical bodies. Rising out of their own bodies and merging their wills into a single Force, they pushed against the natural balance of the Force with everything they had. They fully expected the attempt to kill them, anticipating that their own midi-chlorians, the Force's proxy army inside their bodies, would turn against them, boiling their blood or stopping their hearts. But no counterforce rose against them. The Force seemed to yield. In that silence, they were certain they had won. The balance they had fashioned tipped, the light side dipped, and the dark side rose. It felt as if some great power had been knocked from its throne. Plagueis called a breakthrough galactonic. Both Sith suspected the Jedi had sensed it too, even from Coruscant, light years away. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Sith believed they had not just gained ground against the Jedi, they believed they had changed the Force itself. On that same day, Plagueis proved what he could do with his new power. He took a Bith named Venomous, a former rival he had kept alive in stasis, and manipulated his midi-chlorians to bring him back from death's edge, then let him die again, reviving him once more, and repeating the cycle until the Bith's organs finally gave out, and Plagueis granted him permanent death. Sidious watched in stunned silence. After his apprentice returned to Coruscant, the Moon pushed further. Drunk on newfound power, he attempted the most extreme act of his career. He tried to create a new being through the Force alone, not through any biological process. He wanted to bring into existence a Force-sensitive life conceived without a father, shaped entirely by his will. He stretched himself across the galaxy, reaching through the Force to touch every living thing, trying to will new life into existence without a biological source. The Force did not cooperate. It went silent. It pulled away from him, as if in flight. In his laboratory on Sojourn, the animals he had been experimenting on began dying of terrible diseases. The creation attempt failed. Plagueis could manipulate life, extend it, restart it after death. But he could not make something new from nothing. The Force refused him. Years earlier, after a previous round of experiments had failed, Plagueis had warned Sidious about exactly this. The Force resisted interference. It punished anyone who tried to command it without earning its cooperation. Plagueis knew this because the Force had already tested him once, and he recognized the pattern. When he pushed too far, it pushed back. He ignored it anyway. Plagueis made his failed attempt at creation roughly 9 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. On the desert planet of Tatooine, far from the Sith, far from the Jedi, far from anyone paying attention, a slave named Shmi Skywalker became pregnant with a child who had no father. Shmi Skywalker could not explain her son's origin. She carried the child, gave birth to him, and raised him. But the pregnancy had no explanation. Qui-Gon tested the boy's blood and found a midi-chlorian count of 20,000, higher than any living Jedi, including Master Yoda. He brought the boy before the Jedi Council on Coruscant. The Force was concentrated around Anakin in a way Qui-Gon had never encountered, a vergence, a rare point where Force energy gathers in extreme density, centered on a single person. In Qui-Gon's estimation, the midi-chlorians themselves may have conceived the boy. The boy's name was Anakin Skywalker. The timing of his birth lined up exactly with Plagueis' failed experiment. Plagueis did not create a specimen. He did not choose Shmi. He did not design the boy's body or his connection to the Force. He did something far worse and far more reckless. He violated the Force so deeply that it answered on its own terms. Anakin was not the product of Sith science. He was the Force's rejection of it. The canon novel Master and Apprentice, set about 8 years before the Phantom Menace, records the ancient Jedi prophecy clearly. The Chosen One would come, born of no father, and through him, ultimate balance in the Force would be restored. Another prophecy immediately precedes it. When the Force itself sickens, past and future must split and combine. The Force sickening was exactly what Plagueis and Sidious caused when they shifted the Force towards the dark side. The prophecy does not prove that Plagueis directly caused Anakin's birth, but it ties the Chosen One's arrival to the exact moment the Force was under assault. Even Plagueis himself suspected something like this might happen. Before he ever learned about the boy, he stared into the darkening sky over Sojourn and wondered what the Force would send against them for what they had done. He knew there would be consequences. He just did not expect them to arrive as a 9-year-old boy on Tatooine. When Plagueis finally learned about Anakin, his reaction was not pride, it was terror. Count Dooku, still a Jedi at the time, but already drifting towards the Sith, relayed the news to Palpatine during a private meeting on Coruscant. A child conceived without a father, and a midi-chlorian count off the charts. Qui-Gon Jinn believed this boy was the Chosen One. Palpatine immediately contacted his master. The Mune rushed to Palpatine's apartment at 500 Republica, desperate to see the child for himself. He had to know if the Force had struck back. He arrived too late. One of Amidala's handmaidens told him the boy had already left. Qui-Gon had taken Anakin to the Jedi Temple. Plagueis fell back a step, his thoughts reeling. A single dread consumed him. Everything the Sith had built was now at risk. He did not stop there. Later that evening, from a public observatory overlooking a landing platform, Plagueis watched through macro binoculars as Qui-Gon and the boy spoke near Queen Amidala's starship. He could see the earnest look on the Jedi Master's face, the confused urgency in the child. He lifted his face from the macro binoculars and stretched out with the Force to sense what was happening between them. The Force answered with a flood of images, ferocious battles in deep space, the clashing of lightsabers, partitions of radiant light, and a black helmeted cyborg rising from a table. He stood motionless as the starship lifted from the platform and climbed into the night. He fought to repress the truth. The boy would change the course of history. The Sith had not accidentally created their greatest weapon. They had summoned their executioner. Where the Muun saw doom, Sidious saw a weapon he could turn. His first move was to eliminate the one Sith who understood the danger. On the night before Palpatine's election to Supreme Chancellor in the Muun's own penthouse on Coruscant, Sidious murdered his master, keeping Plagueis talking and refilling his wine glass until the old Sith's eyelids flickered and closed, then unleashing force lightning until the Muun's lungs, hearts, and brain began to fail. As Plagueis choked and reached for the force to save himself, Sidious revealed the truth. The partnership had always been a deception. He had been clouding Plagueis' mind for years, the same technique they had used together against the Jedi, turned inward against the Master himself. The Sith Lord, who had spent decades learning to command midi-chlorians, could not command his own to save his life. With Plagueis dead, Sidious inherited everything, including the problem his master had left behind. Where the Muun had panicked, the Apprentice saw opportunity. Years later, in the Legends novelization of Revenge of the Sith, the Chancellor sat beside Anakin Skywalker at the Galaxy's Opera House on Coruscant and told him a story. He called it The Tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, framing his dead master's midi-chlorian research as the key to saving anyone from death. It was not just a story, it was bait. Palpatine knew Anakin was terrified of losing his wife, Padme, to the visions of death that haunted his sleep. Sidious dangled his dead master's power in front of the Chosen One like a key to a locked door. Palpatine made certain Anakin understood that the Jedi could never offer him this power. Only the Sith could. Years after Plagueis' death, on the mysterious planet of Mortis seen in the Clone Wars, the Father, a being who maintains balance between the light and dark sides of the Force, tests Anakin and recognizes him as the Chosen One. Only Anakin can tame both the daughter, who represents the light, and the son, who represents the dark. Before the Father dies, he recognizes Anakin as the one who brought balance to Mortis and the one who will eventually do the same for the galaxy. Anakin's role was not political, not military, not even Jedi. It was cosmic. The trap closed slowly. Over months and years, Sidious fed Anakin's fears and positioned himself as the only person who could save Padme from the death Anakin kept seeing in his nightmares. The solution Sidious offered him did not come from the Jedi Code. It came from the secrets of a dead Sith Lord named Plagueis. By the time Anakin knelt before Sidious and accepted the name Darth Vader, the Force's answer to the Sith had been turned into the Sith's enforcer. The prophecy was not destroyed, it was delayed. The Force had answered the Sith through a human life, not a tool it could point and fire. A human life meant fear and love, attachment and anger, grief and the burden of choice. Anakin could fall. He could be manipulated. Destiny did not erase agency. For over 2 decades, the Chosen One served the very darkness he was born to destroy. The galaxy believed Anakin Skywalker, the hero with no fear, the Chosen One, had died during the siege of the Jedi Temple. In a sense, that was true. What remained was Vader, sealed in a suit that was as much a prison as it was life support, serving a master who would consider replacing him from the very first day. The being the Force had created to destroy the Sith was now the Empire's enforcer, diminished and obedient. Shortly after the destruction of the Death Star, the bounty hunter Boba Fett delivered a name to Vader. The rebel pilot who destroyed the battle station was called Skywalker. Vader went quiet, and Fett decided it was a good time to leave. Memories of Padme's pregnancy and Palpatine's lie that Vader had killed her flooded his mind at once, and as the pieces fell into place, his rage bled through the Force and cracked the viewport in front of him. He contacted the Emperor by hologram. Palpatine could sense his fury even from across the galaxy. Vader bowed, his anger controlled and deliberate, letting the Emperor believe it was loyalty. But behind the mask, something had shifted. He had a son. Palpatine had been lying for 20 years, and the Chosen One, buried inside the suit since Mustafar, began planning against his master for the first time. Anakin's fall did not erase his identity, it only buried it. Luke Skywalker did not defeat the Emperor with a lightsaber. He threw his weapon away, and when Palpatine turned his lightning on Luke, Anakin Skywalker made the choice the Force had always intended for him. He picked up the Emperor and threw him into the reactor shaft. He destroyed the Sith and fulfilled the prophecy, not as a Jedi weapon or a Sith creation, but as a broken man who chose his son over his master. The 1,000-year Sith grand plan ended the way it began, with a choice made in the dark between a master and an apprentice. The one who set all of this in motion, who shaped Palpatine into what he became, was his own master, Darth Plagueis. His complete journey chronicles his obsession with midi-chlorians to the night his apprentice killed him. If you're curious to see what became of the Chosen One after his fall, the full scope of Darth Vader's reign is more terrifying than you think.